name is Svetlana Velikova. I'm the president of Concordia Students for Parkinson's. This is Professor Lee. She's here today to talk about her research and many other things about her research.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So let's start with the first question that we have. So how do dementia and mild cognitive impairment affect the coordination of cognitive and motor tasks?
Well, dementia and mild cognitive impairment, primarily we think of cognitive decline when we think of those two names. And so maybe that's the more obvious place to start. So with those two conditions, with mild cognitive impairment, we see subtle changes in a person's cognition. And so the good news about a mild cognitive impairment diagnosis is that it's mild enough that people can generally get along and continue to live fairly, well-functioning lives at home. When it comes to dementia, and not every case of mild cognitive impairment converts to dementia, Alzheimer's type dementia or other, but it is a more severe impairment with Alzheimer's type and other dementias that eventually changes in terms of the degeneration in stages so that people aren't so able to live independently when they get further along in the disease state. And now where it comes to motor functioning is kind of interesting. Part of it comes from the neurodegeneration that is associated with both MCI, mild cognitive impairment, or MCI for short, and Alzheimer's type dementia. So part of the way that this affects motor functioning, things like balance, walking, avoidance of falls, is that with healthy aging already, there's good evidence that the brain regions that we associate more with cognitive capacity also seem to be used and recruited in older adults for walking and balancing. And so these predominantly cognitive impairment type disorders have an influence on motor performance as a result of that reliance, even with healthy older adults, on cognition.
Oh wow, okay, thank you so much. So can you elaborate a little bit more on the study that you participated that is called Consensus on Shared Measures of Mobility and Cognition?
Oh, okay, so this is a kind of position paper that was a group publication, and I'm part of this group. It's actually part of a much larger organization in Canada called the Canadian Consortium on Neurodegeneration and Aging. And it really is kind of fueled by the federal government's desire to have a national dementia strategy. And so we're over 300 researchers across the country and form multiple teams, over 30 teams, studying neurodegeneration and aging from the cellular level all the way to other teams that study quality of life, driving safety, healthcare delivery for dementia patients. And so the team I'm on, Team 12, is focused on mobility and cognition and the interactions between the two. So this position paper is really about coming together, all of the team members and experts in mobility and or cognition, and reaching a consensus about the best practices for measurement and assessment. And one of the big things that we focus on in that paper and in our research in general is the importance of the interactions, as I said, between mobility, movement, control, and cognitive control. And so maybe it's not surprising that one of the big recommendations was to not just assess walking as just a plain old walking in a straight line, which is a very typical clinical assessment or test that geriatricians will do, but to add a cognitive load to the walking task. So some people call this dual task walking because you're walking and you're doing something else simultaneously. So you might ask people to recite the months of the year backwards, which is a little different. And you have people do that while they're walking, and then compare that to single task walking where they don't have that cognitive load, and just look at the difference in the characteristics of walking. So typically a healthy older adult might slow down a little bit when they have the second task to do, and their regularity of the footsteps, so the rhythm of their footsteps might be compromised, so it becomes more variable. And that variability we know to be predictive of falling if you get too variable. But then when you start to add neurodegeneration to the mix, then you start to see that added cognitive load. That test becomes much more sensitive to the neurodegenerative conditions.
That's so interesting. So I want to know, how was your research in University of Toronto? Do you have any interesting stories to tell?
Oh, well, that it was 30 years ago by now. So yeah, I mean, so many stories to tell. So I did my PhD at University of Toronto in the psychology department, and to this day, that department is primarily a research-only department. So there are really no clinical trainees who are training to become therapists or whatnot. We're all doing research. And the group that I was working with, and my research supervisor, Dr. Fergus Craig, was and continues to be, one of the kind of premier theorists in the research on memory, human memory in general. So, opening up any psychology textbook, if you look at cognition, he's going to be there. And the department was really full of these very prominent kind of cutting edge researchers in memory theory. And what was interesting about that is, you don't appreciate just how influential, like worldwide, these professors are. They're just your professors. But it was only after I left and started doing postdoctoral work at Duke University in the US that I realized, these other professors at Duke University are referring to, these professors, these former professors of mine, constantly, because they were really the ones who pioneered a lot of the foundational theoretical work on memory theory. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that's really an anecdote or story, but it's a reflection on what I think of that I took away from that time. It's very influential.
Yeah. Well, how does that compare to, for example, Concordia University? Do they have any new discoveries on neurological disorders?
Oh, well, at Concordia, as you might know, we don't have a medical school per se. So I think you have to kind of look a lot around the edges a little bit for these kinds of discoveries. But nonetheless, we have, in the psychology department, we have a center for research in behavioral neurobiology. So there are people in the department who are studying memory and thinking and decision making and learning at the biological level. And it's very cutting edge work because some people are using optical imaging and other techniques that aren't so commonplace in behavioral neuroscience labs. And we actually have a new neuroscience program that is just about to be born, actually, with new lab space that's going to be, teaching lab space. So, a whole new generation of students will have an opportunity to really get into, the kind of biological, neurochemical, and so forth, that level of understanding neurodegeneration.
Wow, that sounds so promising.
Yeah, so to be continued.
Yeah. Also, do you have any other interesting stories that you have come across while researching?
Oh, well, there's all kinds of things. I will tell you a bit about, some of the work that we've been doing. So I'd say, there's one large branch of my program of research that's devoted to really trying to understand the underlying relationship between mobility, like walking and balancing, and cognition in healthy aging. And another large stream of research in my lab is devoted to taking those conclusions, and just generally those conclusions, seem to point to those neural circuits associated with controlled attention, so prefrontal cortex, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex in particular, and taking that knowledge and then kind of turning it around and saying, okay, well, if that's what older adults are relying on and recruiting when they are engaged in motor tasks like walking and balancing, how can we strengthen those areas through intervention? And so the interventions that we typically study are really trying to find that match between the training tasks that we give people, and they can be computerized brain training tasks. Sometimes we do aerobic exercise training, which is thought to also improve executive control, attentional control processes, and those parts of the brain. But we try to get more ecological, right? Because we can do all of these highly controlled experiments in the lab and ask seniors to come in and engage in these, multiple times a week, right? They're very dedicated, our research participants, and they might do this for 6 weeks, 12 weeks at a time, and then come back to do the post-training assessment so that we can compare the before and after, see if they've improved in their mobility and their dual tasking. And so in efforts to get more ecologically valid, a couple of things happened, just kind of came to my attention. So I was lucky enough to be approached by a French postdoctoral fellow, Dr. Frédéric Poncet, who's a trained occupational therapist. And so she was very interested in doing a cooking training experiment. So how do you do a cooking training experiment? Well, if you're an occupational therapist, then you have like a whole manual of all of the things that you're going to teach your research participants, in this case, healthy older adults, who didn't cook very much, okay? And so we thought, oh, this is a great ecological way of training people instead of sitting them in front of a computer or a tablet and playing brain games, or walking on a treadmill, or cycling to get their aerobic capacity up. So Frédéric designed this cooking program we called Project Gusto, and by all standards, this is the most popular training study we've ever run in my lab.
I can see why.
Yeah.
I mean, it has a reference for Ratatouille, right?
Yeah.
That sounds fun.
Yes, it was fun. It was enjoyable. The reason that we thought it was a good ecological training program is because you have people stand, you have people shift their balance, you have people reaching for the ingredients, and Frédéric put out all the ingredients plus some irrelevant objects. So they were doing some cognitive selection at the same time. They had to learn how to sequence their actions, and there's a very rigorous assessment of the person's cooking behavior that we took before and after, and it really is every little move. Did they do all of the parts of the recipe correctly? Did they skip something? Did they repeat something that they shouldn't have done twice? Did they exhibit good food safety and wash their hands? All those things kind of get marked down. And so what was interesting is, maybe because she's French, some of the recipes were like, before and after the training phase, people had to make an omelette the French way.
The French way.
Yeah.
All right.
Another thing they had to do was make a chocolate cake. So this is part of the reason that people found this really appealing, is that during the training phase, they would learn as a group, they would do all these activities, and then on day 2, they would execute the cooking, be coached along, and then they would sit as a group of older people and eat and socialize. So there are a lot of things to this training program that, it's very multidimensional.
Yeah.
But we had one older fellow who was so proud of himself because he'd learned to cook this omelet that his wife called and said, "Can you please give my husband another recipe, because he's making an omelet every morning." and I can't eat that many eggs. Please give him something else to do.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was a kind of funny thing, but and people really wanted to continue with the cooking lessons, and as an experiment, there has to be an end point, but there was another older gentleman who was so positive about the whole experience, he asked for the whole training manual and then proposed to offer this program in his community men's club of seniors, and so I believe that's still ongoing. And so it's really nice to see that kind of continuity beyond what we're able to do in our 12-week period.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that definitely sounds like something I want to do.
Yeah.
Even though I won't be able to, but yeah.
But nicely, we were able to show that there were some improvements to mobility, of course, as well as cooking skill and nutritional knowledge. So we think there was sort of an overall improvement in quality of life that came from Project Gusto. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Lee, for being with us here today.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
And you two guys, have a nice day.